Mr. Zach Linden. Mr. Zach Linden, a Phi Beta Kappa from George Washington University with a majors in philosophy and global politics. He is also a minor in jazz performance. He's been coordinating Bana.org, which is an international educational empowerment network that creates scholarship opportunities for survivors of genocide in Sudan. Widely traveled as a part of his raggy band, Hindin also had a stint in India in 2009 where he studied Hindustani classical music as GW International Research Symposiast. As of now, Mr. Hindin inspires to continue studying philosophy, finally pursuing an MFA in creative non-fiction. Having been a student for more than 15 years, he still continues to learn, this time by being a teacher. And today, he'll be shedding light on a philosophical novel that deals with the intricacies of human relationship, the unbearable lightness of being by Milan Kundera.
Being friends. It's wonderful, isn't it? It's a really nice thing. I want to thank Rahul for inviting me to be here with you tonight. It's a real pleasure. And like the lady said, my name is Zach. I teach English in a public high school some 2 hours from here in a small village named Kadod. And up to now, I've been living and traveling through northern India for almost a year now. And up to this point, I was under the impression that the art of reading had fallen behind the art of watching the TV serial. So it's a pleasure to know that folks like you are keeping the art of reading alive and well. I would also add that as a foreigner, I really find those TV serials educational. I say that because whenever one comes on, I leave the room to read a book. So I call it the art of reading on purpose. And the reason I say so is because reading at its best is not a passive act of leisure, it's an act of creation. Anyone here who's ever written something genuine, just like our last speaker, knows the struggle that comes from finding the right words. And to that end, I suspect that many of you also know the intense joy that comes from a job well done. And that's writing, which I would submit is something like reading in reverse. That is, when we write, we convert thoughts into words, and when we read, we convert words into thoughts. The thing is, those thoughts are important, and like I said, at their best, they're an act of creation. It seems ironic now, but before the television and serials, books were thought of as the diversion of the masses. In fact, of all people, Albert Einstein warned against reading too many books. Reading, after a certain age, he wrote, diverts the mind too much from its creative pursuits. Any man who reads too much and uses his own brain too little falls into lazy habits of thinking. But books, I think he and all of us would agree, don't necessarily divert the mind from its creative pursuits. After all, if it did, it would be a very bad business model for Rahul and Bookoholics.com. The point is that there is a vast difference, and a famous essayist named H. Chesterton noted this, there's a vast difference between a man who is eager to just read a book and a man who is tired who just wants a book to read. So it's very simple, but this is my thesis, more of an experimental hypothesis, that in average day-to-day reading, we convert words into thoughts. But in the art of reading, we convert words into thoughts into actions. The world of books, great as it is, should not mean an escape from the world we live in. At best, this kind of reading only serves to romanticize ourselves, dramatize our situations, or lose the present moment in an endless comparison between fact and fiction, none of which does much good for anyone. The art of reading, however, takes us into a world that is utterly human, freeing us from what would otherwise be animal life in an environment that is meaningless, where meanings have been entirely substituted by cold, scientific facts. So it could be a story, a scene, a character, a sentence, maybe just a turn of phrase, but something happens in your favorite book, and just a few well-chosen words suddenly help you make sense of yourself, your friends, your family, your childhood, even your enemies. Simply, good readings of good books help make the world into your world. So, this is a book that has contributed much to my world. It's called The Unbearable Lightness of Being. It's a novel by Milan Kundera. He originally wrote it in Czech in 1982, although the first editions were brought out 2 years later in French and English. On the surface, the book is about two men, two women, living in communist Prague in spring of 1968. But at least for me, the book has very little to do with Czechoslovakia or Prague or communism, or 1968 for that matter. The setting could be anywhere, and the characters could be anyone. And it's this state of total contingency that's really at the heart of the book. I won't pretend to be able to give you everything that this book has given me in the next 10 minutes. After all, if I could, I probably would have just written the book myself. Thematically, the book explores possible reactions to the notion that we have only one life to live. This random biological event that occurs once and never again. This is what he calls the quote-unquote lightness of being. On the one hand, it's liberating since the decisions that we make are, in the grand scheme, very insignificant. But he says this lightness is unbearable because as human beings, irrational as it is, we quite naturally wish that our lives have some bigger purpose or meaning or truth. I guess in short, we wish that our lives outlived us. But where is that possible in this day and age? Here today and gone tomorrow. I mean, isn't that the message we're beamed every day in so many different ways? Who is it that lives forever? Even those characters from the TV serials always seem to get murdered or dying in their beloved arms. A bad way to go. Characters. The people who come to life in books. They live forever. And if we allow them, they become as much a part of us as they were for our grandparents. I'm getting to the point where I've said everything that I have to for the evening, but I want to briefly dwell on that word character. In English, when we say, oh, so-and-so, you know, she's a real character, what we mean to say is that she's interesting, she's memorable, she's larger than life, and the reason we're talking about her is because somehow, some way, she still manages to be a part of life. Fellow Bookoholics, I commend you. Read on. Wonderful books are as numerous as the stars in the sky, and just like stars, they help us find our way when we're lost, or give us pause to wonder at the world around us. But I'd also remind you that there are as many great characters as there are living human breaths. Life in the quote-unquote real world can, and often I would say does, tend to be more interesting than even than the books of our favorite stories. So, the people that we meet, I would say, ought to be treated like the characters we read about. That is, we should take them seriously, but not too seriously. Moving forward, I'd share with you my own challenging thought experiment, which kind of helps me figure out whether what I'm doing is right for me. When you make your next big decision, pretend you're authoring a story. It's your story. Don't just make rational choices, make plot twists. Are you your own favorite character? Is your favorite story indeed your very own? Or are you living the story of someone else? Would you be able to read about yourself and say, well, now that's interesting? Let us here and tonight commit to unfolding the days ahead of us as a great author unfolds the pages of your favorite story. Make it a wondrous, funny, heartbreaking, joyful, happy, sad, beautiful, ugly, but always interesting story. Interesting is actually a funny word. It comes from two Latin stems, inter, which means between, and est, which is being. So to be interesting, one ought to find themselves in the midst of beings, just like we are here tonight, and not locked up in their room reading too many books. Thanks.